worst blizzards in recorded history. Known as the Great White Hurricane, this blizzard hit the East Coast without warning in mid-March in 1888. 50 inches of snow fell, 200 ships sank in waves caused by fierce winds, houses and trains were buried in snowdrifts, and more than 400 people died. The chaos actually inspired the building of America's first underground subway systems in the following decades. The Knickerbocker Storm of 1922 got its name after a disaster that followed 2 days of snowfall that centered in Washington, D.C. Massive quantities of snow accumulated on the completely flat roof of the Knickerbocker Theater. During intermission of the movie, the entire roof collapsed on the crowd inside. In the end, 98 theatergoers were killed and 133 more were injured. In March of 1993, the storm of the century stretched from Canada to Cuba and raged across 26 states. Several feet of snow combined with hurricane-force winds caused massive ocean swells and resulted in over $6.6 billion in damages. The storm shut down the South for 3 days and was responsible for 310 deaths. Just 3 years later, the blizzard of 1996 dumped an average of 3 feet of snow across the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. Washington, D.C. was declared a disaster area, and the federal government shut down for almost a week. Every major airport on the East Coast closed, leaving holiday travelers stranded. The storm claimed the lives of 154 people, many of whom died in car accidents. Worse, afterwards, heavy rains combined with melting snow caused massive flooding, which killed 33 more people. And finally, Snowmageddon, aka the entire month of February 2010. 3 back-to-back-to-back blizzards broke new snowfall records. After the second storm, 68% of the country was covered in snow. After the third storm, hundreds of thousands of people in the Northeast were left without power. Stay warm out there, and stay safe.
Please do not adjust your television. The following program is brought to you in beautiful black and white. A good Sunday morning to all you cowpokes. And Happy New Year 1949. Your weather forecast for January 2nd calls for partly cloudy skies with highs in the 30s and the possibility of some snow flurries in the mountains. Safe travels, partners.
On Sunday afternoon, January 2nd, 1949, an unexpected Arctic cold front swept down from Canada and collided with heavy, moisture-laden air from the south. A massive multi-state winter weather event was born. Portions of Colorado, Nebraska, Wyoming, and the Dakotas were pummeled by heavy snow, unrelenting winds, and sub-zero temperatures. The blizzard didn't let up until the following Wednesday, but this was just the beginning. Like the Dust Bowl storms of the 30s, with their ominous walls of black clouds, the 1949 blizzards raged white for nearly 2 months. The winds seldom ceased their incessant howl. Temperatures bottomed out the mercury in thermometers. Although much of Wyoming was blasted by the storm, it was the state's eastern and southeastern counties that took the brunt of the beating. Wind gusts of over 80 miles per hour in some places created drifts 20 to 30 feet high, yet left the ground completely bare in other areas. The storm blanketed 3,300 miles of Wyoming roads. All auto, bus, rail, and air traffic came to a halt. Thousands of travelers were stranded. Ranches, farms, and entire communities became islands in a sea of white. Livestock and wildlife suffered and died. 17 people in Wyoming perished. It was the worst sustained winter weather event the Upper Plains states have ever experienced. Dubbed the Great White Death and the Storm of the Century, this was the blizzard of 1949. WYDOT, National Guard, and county plows were finally making some headway against the drifts. But oftentimes they'd hit something solid, sometimes an abandoned car, or a frozen cow, a fence line or small outcropping. There was no telling what lay beneath the towering white blockades.
And colder, and so they decided that they'd start back, and they started walking back, and two neighbors survived the walk, and they said that my aunt and uncle were trying to hold up a blanket so the kids could walk behind it, and it just didn't work, and they went and the kids couldn't make it. And when they found the bodies, well, my aunt was reaching down on her knee to get the little girl, and she froze in that position. My uncle was trying to hold up the boy, and they found him froze in that position.
The coded messages were cited and acted upon by a volunteer auxiliary of the Air Force, the Civil Air Patrol. These pilots flew food, fuel, and medical supplies to isolated families, completing thousands of missions, often in terrible weather conditions.
There were two pilots in Pine Bluffs making runs off of Highway 30 right downtown Pine Bluffs and delivering groceries.
They had people with private planes, but they would have ways of marking out there in the country, we need a doctor, or we need this medicine, we need this.
Pastures that suffered most from the blizzard of '49. Some cattle and sheep died standing in place from exposure or from suffocation. The fine snow froze in their noses and cut off their air supply. Others simply starved to death. Official estimates put Wyoming cattle loss at 55,000 head, and sheep at about 150,000. Other estimates projected that over 1 million cattle and sheep would be lost in the four-state area. But Stockman considered all of these figures to be low. Outlying farms and ranches and Indian reservations that were impacted and isolated by the storms. Cities as big as Cheyenne and towns as small as Lusk were drifted over with snow. Hotels and restaurants were crowded with stranded travelers. Because of closed transportation corridors, emergency food supplies, as well as those on grocery store shelves, began with only 3 inches of snow. A short time later, all that changed.
We had passenger trains stranded in Rawlins. First time, 250 passengers, and the last time, 650. At one time, the Red Cross was feeding 1,700 meals a day for stranded passengers and otherwise.
6-foot drifts on Highway 287 were reported on January 18th, with a temperature of 22 degrees below zero. A new onslaught of snow hit on January 23rd.
On the west end where the highway went through, it drifted into the Ideal Motel, I would say up to the eaves of the tourist cabins.
Railroad service between Rawlins and Laramie finally resumed after almost 2 weeks of inactivity. It was then that Rawlins received its first carload of mail in 12 days. In Lusk, drifts piled up 12 to 13 feet high. Outside of town, they approached 30 feet. A drift towering over a highway patrol car puts it all into perspective.
Well, that same patrolman was standing on that 49 Ford car with his hands stretched up in the air. He was at least 6 foot tall himself, and those drifts were several times taller than he was. There was drifts 20 to 30 feet deep, really, on the highway and the railroad.
Main Street Lusk businesses were nearly inaccessible.
I recall going